Alright, we're at Farfields and I'm with Nina today, and we're going to be talking about some projects that she's working on. Do you want to talk a little bit about the scope of the project, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So the project that I'm working on is a Korean natural farming technique, and it's using IMOs, which is Indigenous soil microorganisms. And the project involves collecting the microorganisms in the soil that are indigenous to the land here, and also indigenous to and that have evolved in certain ecotypes. So the microbes that grow in a swamp are a lot different than a pasture that's in the full sun all the time, and that are a lot different than a forest that is well established and has been there a very long time. So the goal of the project is to harvest the organisms that have evolved to break down organic matter and carbon and feed other organisms and other plants in their area well, and bring them back into gardening systems. So it involves collecting them on rice in a cedarwood box, and it also involves creating these ferments that are essentially food for the microorganisms and also food for the plants.
Can you talk a little bit about the process that you were going through this morning?
Sure.
Cool.
I was extracting a fermented plant juice, or an FPJ. A lot of these natural farming inputs have long names that they put into acronyms. So FPJ is what I was extracting, and it was essentially tomato shoots that I clipped like this much of the tips of the growing part of the tomato plant, and I collected it a week ago, as much as I could, which was a half pound of tomato shoots, and I weighed them and I chopped them up, and I added equal parts sugar and mushed them together and created a ferment that sat for a week, and and a week later I strained it out, and what it contains is a lot of the growth hormones from the very growing tips of the tomato plant. And and so that can be used in several ways. It can be applied to growing plants in the garden or the nursery at certain stages of their growth to promote development, and it can also be used in the rice that is in the initial part of the IMO process, where you're collecting the soil microorganisms into the rice.
Beautiful. So what are your intentions for bringing this to Farfields, and how are you going to be implementing this on the land?
I hope to really help cultivate connections with the microorganisms that are surrounding us, and I hope to bring back the vibrancy of what the organisms can bring, because I feel like they're a bridge between a lot of the nutrients that are available in the soil and the plants. And I think that by really actively seeking them, we'll be developing these relationships that in a very antibiotic world where we are disconnected from a lot of the microorganisms, and yes, we are starting to realize that they are very important. And I think that this is part of that realization, is seeking them out and realizing how important they are. And I also see benefit in cultivating them in order to help bring these indigenous plants that we're trying to bring back and grow in our nursery and grow on this farm. I think that they're an integral part in allowing for those delicate plants that are used to a very delicate ecosystem. I think they're essential for them actually thriving.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's nice. Like what's coming up is just that connection with the land and our healthy soils, and bringing back these indigenous microorganisms, but also connecting with the health of like our own internal systems, and people becoming more aware of like probiotics. But what does that even mean? Because a lot of people will buy the probiotics that are made in the lab, and we can, there is that more awareness around the ferments and being able to cultivate our own probiotics. But yeah, it's just a really beautiful way of connecting to the plants as well, and bringing that awareness. So specifically, do you mind mentioning just like the ginseng and the mushrooms, how you will implement these into those systems?
Well, I think the hope for that is collecting the organisms in a well-established stand of, let's say, ginseng, and then collecting them on the rice, and then you preserve it with sugar, and then from there you grow those organisms onto like a bran, wheat bran or rice bran, and then from there you grow those organisms onto soil, and then that can be either used as a compost tea application, or just that can be crumbled up and put into the soil with the new ginseng seedlings, and so you're kind of providing those plants with the community of organisms that it would normally have, that in a nursery setting, in a sterile potting mix, it's not going to have. And that's something I forgot to mention before with gardening. The assumption here is that we've been working the soil, and when you're breaking it up, and although we try to reduce the amount of tilling that is done here, it's still, every time you dig up the soil, you're disrupting the web and the ecosystem and the microbiology that's active and providing nutrients for those plants. So that's an assumption that we have, and that also is a reason why it's, I think, important to bring those microorganisms back into the soil.
Beautiful. Yeah, looking forward to seeing the progression of this project, and thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
And thank you for the work that you're doing. It's really important.
Thank you for being curious about it.
Yes. Is there anything else you'd like to say? On the spot.
Yeah, I think that it's really, this project is striving to bridge a disconnect in our growth as humans, where we've forgotten how a plant's health is so connected to the soil biology, and yeah, I think it's striving to bridge that gap.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you so much again. And,
You're welcome.
Yeah, we'll have to track the progress and stay tuned. Thank you.
Sounds great.